morning. I'm Paul Livingston. I'm back again to do another art demo through the BOAA. And what I'm going to do today is a watercolor based on this sketch here. This was something I had prepared through my BOAA program, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we're ready to go for a watercolor. Please join us. Okay, for today's BOAA painting here, a watercolor, I'm doing basically a floral within a scene. And this is the little BOAA sketch that I worked up. For those of you that have been with the class before, you've heard me speak about this process many times. And I find it's a really rich source for finding material, some different material to paint. I can go more places with my imagination than I can go with my car or my canoe. Anyway, so that's the rough sketch. And from that, I scanned it into the computer and worked it up a little bit, something like this. And that's what I will use to base my drawing on, or my drawing and my painting. So in preparation for this, I've gone and shot some pictures in the backyard of some of the flowers, this lily type shapes that I saw. So we had some lilies, and I get that reference material. If you were doing something like this and you don't have it in your garden, you might find it on the internet somewhere. Google flowers, Google lilies, and you'd have dozens of images, I'm sure. Anyway, so this is just a loose reference material that I will use. And from this sketch here, I've done a pencil drawing and scaled it up a little bit. Some might be able to, most people probably don't have the use of a projector, and you'd take a sketch like this and scale it up, draw it up on your watercolor paper and go from there. I have the luxury of having a projector at hand, which is a wonderful time-saving tool that I've used for many years. So I can take this that I've designed that and worked it up, and I can get it 90% accurate to what I want it to do, and let that be the next stage in the evolution. Okay, watercolor, we'll get that material out and we'll go from here. You might see on here that I've put in a little bit, you might see this little bit of orange stuff here. This is masking fluid that I've used to brush in there. It takes a little bit of time to dry, so I did it prior to it, but it just comes in a little bottle like that, or there's other kinds, and they brush it on, and it protects the paper, protects the white of the paper while you're doing your painting, and then at the end of the painting you take a rubber thing or just your finger and rub that off. It nubs off, and you brush it away, and it keeps those areas nice and white. So following my sketch that I've done, what I want to do is wet the area for the sky. So I'll be fairly generous with water and just brush this around in the sky. If it comes over a little bit, that's okay. I'll still have to be a little bit careful where I'm putting my tones, but this gives a nice little bit of wetness in order to start putting the paint in there. The wetness will help the paint to flow around, and it'll also keep it fairly faint. Just water. Go over that. And that whole background, as you can see in that original sketch that I had, will stay fairly soft. I don't want that soaking to stay soaked, but just take off some of the excess like that. I'm always adding water anyways when I'm painting. So I cleaned off my tray especially for today. And I'm going to be using some cerulean blue here for background in the sky, a little bit of that. A little bit of Payne's Gray and ultramarine. And what I'm putting on is fairly thin. Touch the paint, touch the water, and gonna add in, indicate some trees and stuff in there. Just dab it in, and that moisture is moving that around. I'm not being too careful in the putting in these colors here at the moment because it'll diffuse out. But it just starts to put something in there, and I'll work around the flowers. This is more just underpainting. It's more of that. This light blue here will serve to punch these flowers forward once I get the rest of the color set in here. And I'm not brushing back and forth too many times. I don't want a lot of brush strokes, but that's what the water was for, to help the paint diffuse as soon as I put it on and apply it. And we'll just see. So what we've got here is an interesting perspective of what we've got. The flowers in the foreground, over top of a scene with a building in the background, maybe a barn or a little country cottage. And then these flowers and vegetation in the foreground, as if you were sitting down amongst the flowers. And they're right up close to you, they're right at your eye level. A good time to ask the question, where's your eye level in this picture? And for me, I find that when I see this, I see the house back there, and this part of the house, this end gable here, that's about my eye level. And you can see that. You see that in the distance, and then you see the flowers in the foreground, and it looks like that's about where your eyes are sitting in this garden looking at the flowers. I want to try to keep this soft look of this rough that I did. I don't want to get too hard shapes in the background. I want to stay fairly faint. And the water that I put down there helps to achieve that. It keeps them soft. Basically, it's a monochromatic painting in the background, and then coming up to the detail and the warmer colors of the flowers in front. And as it develops, I'll see just where and how much I have to add a little bit more tone in the background to punch them forward. Want to try to keep some of these leaves fairly free of paint at the moment until I go in and put some greens in there. Any detail that we have was going to be up in the front here. The sharp edges, it's going to be in the flowers and the plants that are going off to the side here. This isn't very extensively drawn, it's just sketched out roughly to give me an idea where my color areas are going to be. All right, I'm going to pause this for a moment and dry it with the dryer. Okay, I'm going to pick this up here now again. I will wet this sky area again. That drying spell was just to dry the blue that I put down, but I'll dampen that sky. I want to put a little bit of color into that soft yellow. So I've got a cadmium yellow here and a Windsor yellow. They're a little bit different, but not a whole lot. Very bright. I don't want that kind of brightness up there. I'll knock that back a little bit. And very dilute going on to this wet area. The watercolor tends to dry a little lighter anyway, so if I'm careful to put it on fairly light at this stage, it dries even lighter. Just a little bit of early morning or early evening kind of glow. Okay. That's just a glaze, just a little thin application there, fairly wet. And that'll give it a little bit of a glow in the rest of the painting. Okay, while that's drying, I won't rush it here now, but I'll keep moving and I'll start to introduce some of these blades of grass. You can see how they go down. I'm going to use the angle brush, the small angle brush. Take out the big one here, clean it off. And then just a little angle brush, it's about 1/4 inch in size, and it can mix up a little bit of green. So the green goes into the yellow and that brightens it up a little bit. We're going to need a fair bit of it, fairly intense, so get a little bit more with it, brighten it up. The brightness of these colors up in the foreground here is going to help pop them into the foreground and set them out in front of the background. So this is the benefit of having a little bit of a drawing worked out. This doesn't have to be super botanically accurate, but it's nice to have a convincing bit of a study, like getting the reference to see how some of the shapes of the flowers go, and how the shapes of the leaves and how they stand up amongst the out of the bed of flowers. So these are fairly wet applications here. It can occasionally touch the green and the yellow and put a little bit of extra, change the color up a little bit as we go. You try to keep in mind which leaf is over the one in front of it, how they lean, how they curve and bend. So I'm just following that. This is fairly time-consuming kind of thing. You'd want to give it a little bit of time to work it out. And because it's quite intricate here, it's good to have a little bit of have your drawing worked out well to give you an idea how it's going, where the colors should be. Basically paint by number, without the numbers. I hope that you folks that are stuck at home with calling up to get this video and the others that we've done in the last few weeks, I hope that you are managing to find a little bit of time to sit down and devote to your art skills. After all, this is what the objective of our summer art program was all about, is to keep your painting and drawing skills up so that they don't wither and go away on you when it's time to come classes again. I'm happy with the way that these are shaping up. I'll have some room for more in there and some more contrast perhaps a little bit as we go. But having this established in this far, then it gives you a good idea where to take it and how much more you might need to put in afterwards. This is dry, yeah. More leaves. I'm more concerned with getting the effect, a convincing, pleasing effect when I'm doing a painting. This business of high realism is all well and good, and I've done enough of that in my time and still will do, but I do find it much more enjoyable, kind of, like I said, working from imagination, and I guess my background allows me to do that, but I still think it's a lot more fun than doing the high realism stuff. But to get a convincing image that's pleasing to the eye, you can have a lot of fun in painting and drawing, and come by with some pleasing results, come home with some pleasing results. All right, let's see what we got here. These are going to be weeds and reeds and thistles and such. You could make it a whole tangle of wildflowers in here. Many of these stems and leaves might have another layer, another glaze added to it. Once I see how the tones and colors work out here. Time to start thinking about some of the negative spaces down here, I think. Put a little bit, that Antwerp blue or Windsor blue has a nice garden kind of a blue to go to. Introduces another aspect of color into the thing. I'm keeping it loose. I'm not going to get too occupied with detail in this. I'll just leave myself room a little bit for the odd bit of grass coming up and over or in behind some things. Right now what I'm doing is the negative space in between some of these blades of leaves. If the leaf or the stem is the positive shape, then the space around it, anything adjacent to it, is the negative space. Some of this can carry on through here. You're building a texture with color. A texture of grasses that might be down there. A slight bit of blue that's in this color right now is helping to punch these brighter greens a little more forward. It helps to create a little bit of depth in the picture. Depth of field, more perspective. I keep mixing some paint, a little more green out there. That's Hooker's green. That green's Hooker's green. And the yellow is to brighten it up. Just to touch some of that in a wet area. It flows. Blends out. Not everything has to be hard defined. It's just a nice way of creating a little bit of a color blending in that area. It's not detail, but it gives that sense of detail. Always going back to the water to keep my brush cleaned out and picking up a little bit more color. A little darker space, a little darker, not quite shadows, but it's just some darker areas back down in amongst the leaves here that kind of suggest the depth of the density of that foliage that's down in there. Okay. I'm going to have to pause here momentarily and make sure that this is good and dry, and then I'll go on to doing a little bit more of that sense in the background there. I like this angled brush because I can use the fine tip on it to get a fine line. I can press a little bit to get a thicker line, or I can use the whole width of the brush to fill in a larger area. Okay. Okay, we'll take a little bit of a pause here now. Okay, so now we'll continue and develop some of the tones up in the background, up in through behind the building here, some of these tree shapes on the hillside, nothing too specific. It's just putting another layer into the painting there. I think before I do that, though, I'm going to introduce a little bit of that blue into the sky. So I'll just switch to a slightly larger brush. That soft cerulean blue with a bit of other mix in it, a little bit darker. And also I think I'm going to wet a little bit. Just to give some dampness into that area so it's not going to grab so hard. And then use the water to soften off that edge bit before it dries to a hard edge. Just soften it with a clean, damp brush. That yellow that's down there already is fairly faint, but even so, as light as it is, it's still affecting this blue going down and giving it a little bit of a greenish hue to it. But it's all good. All right, and then I'll quickly dry that, that's okay. Just a hair dry. I use this paint stripper, it's really hot, but you could use a hair dryer. Or be patient and give it 10-15 minutes to dry. Anyways, I want a little bit of control on this brush, so I'm going to go and mix up, what do I see here? I see Payne's Gray in there. And certainly some blue, so I'll put this Antwerp blue in there, maybe a touch of ultramarine. Yeah. I mix that in and I get a deep, rich blue in there. Again, watercolors will soften up in their drying. Let's see here. I want that to be fairly soft, so I'm going to dampen that again. Just damp. Back in there. And start putting in some of these tree shapes. It's nothing too laboriously drawn out to be any kind of specific kinds of trees, other than the shape of them suggests that it might be cedars or poplar trees, maybe, if you got these tall poplars. But it's something like you might find off on a rural hillside. And slowly building these shapes, the tones that I saw in this pareidolia thing. If you want to soften that edge quickly before it's dry, just wet your brush and blend it a little bit, soften it out. You can build up those tones anytime. I want to bring out this house a little bit more. So to set that off, the tones in behind there probably want to be a little bit darker. Always a good idea to have your paper towel handy if you want a quick dab of something to dry it down. We have this hillside coming down here. As you add more and more detail and bring it in to the image, what's the word? Develop it into the image that you see, it slowly takes shape. But it's the little bit of details. If you've done any of this kind of work at all, it's the little bits of detail that really takes a lot of time. It moved along fairly quickly when we first started, but it's the little details that really take the time. I'm trying to keep the shape of the flower, keep true to the shape of the flowers that I've drawn on there. And as I put tone into the background, in the negative space around these flowers here, not getting too complexicated with it, but the shapes of those flowers come forward, come out. And keep just dipping your brush in that little color reservoir that you've mixed up there and carry that color across. It can vary a little bit as you go. Doesn't hurt to have another tone of blue or something in there. And if you think about a practical side for some of these artworks that you do, yeah, a relative or a friend might appreciate a little card or a little painting that you've mounted up, if you're happy with it. This might make a nice kind of a greeting card eventually. Okay, and let's think about the tones that are down in here. Careful not to make them too sharp. If you put down a line and think, oh, it's just a little bit too heavy and too sharp edged, just a clean brush but damp. A damp brush, you can just soften those edges a little bit. A brush load like that with water on it, just water, can draw some of that color into an area that you want a little more soft bit of tone in there. Ultramarine. And we'll do in the negative space here around some of these wildflowers and weeds that are down here. A little bit of blue against that green. The green is a little bit warmer color, so it comes forward. You put the blue in there, it knocks that back into the background a little bit. Pretty heavy there. This is a little bit of an additional glaze over these areas here that I feel I want to darken them up a little bit. Nothing like sitting around watching paint dry. But you can have a good time doing it. This gets in, works this tone, deeper tone into this negative space areas down here. It helps to bring the pop them forward, but the darker definition area is going to be closer up to the foreground here. I haven't used a lot of different colors in this composition. It's fairly simple. What else do we need here? Move back over to this side here. Bring out this flower a little bit. I beg your pardon if I go silent for some times when I'm doing these pieces, because I am thinking of it and I can't think and talk at the same time. Sorry. But give me a piece of gum and I'm away. You see how deepening the tones in and around these flowers has brought them a little more strongly to the foreground. Draw some of that tone down a little bit more. This is usually the time when I'm working. I say I don't talk too much because I get wrapped up in what I'm doing. This is the time when everybody should be asking questions, and in class, sitting here, and they say, well, whatever questions come to mind, speak up. I take it this will be going to the editing and then coming out in a couple of weeks' time for the Google discussion, the Zoom discussion. Speaking to my cameraman here.
Yeah, no, hopefully in a week they'd be able to, after seeing this, in a week they'd be able to see you on Zoom to ask you the real questions.
Okay. All right. Now that soft bluey gray there. Let's see what we can put into this building in the background here. Nothing too distinct. Just use water to travel this around, move it around a bit. Anyways, let me take a little bit of a pause here. I'll dry this. back to this here now. Starting to have to think about how this is coming up. We can see now that with this white, the way that they're white right now, my original intent was to think about putting those flowers as a very soft, creamy yellow, but I don't think they stand out really well, and I'd like to maybe punch it a little bit more. So I'm going to add a little bit more to the yellow and make them slightly orangey, something like tiger lilies. I don't think that'll hurt it. And also, I'm going to use the fan brush here, a soft fan brush. I find it's really nice for doing leaves and weeds and stuff. These could be other wildflowers with petals on them, and another little bit of color. Actually, that might be a good idea to put in there. So that fan brush. A little bit over here too. It's just makes it look a little more spontaneous, not quite as deliberate as painting in one leaf at a time. A little bit possibly ready. I'm not sure what kind of flowers those would be, but something like that gives a little bit more, visual interest, perhaps. You'd have to go to your flower book to get a sense of what flowers might grow like that in that configuration. I vaguely recall seeing something like this. Now, with those flowers, again, here's a little bit of red, warm red. I'm going to add a bit of yellow to that. So there's a nice, little more yellow. That's got that kind of daylily orange to it. And touch of water so it stays quite moist. Again, watercolors will dry a little bit lighter than they look to be when they go on. I think that's going to serve quite nicely. You can add a little bit more yellow. For me, it helps to have, for doing flowers especially, it helps to have the drawing first to get that down so I know where that color is going. Some people might feel more confident with flowers that they can go quite freehand with it and put it down, but I think I like to have it a little bit drawn out like that. Now I gotta let that dry so that it when it's dry, I can go and take off that masking fluid that's in there. That white that you see in there is the masking fluid, or the light areas, even though the masking fluid itself is kind of pinkish. But it's just that it repels the paint. I'm happy with those the way that's going. I'm getting keen on that. if I do say so myself. I have to pick up a little bit more, make up a little bit more of that orangey color. So I can go back to the same color as the yellows. Yeah, we're getting close to that water. These daylily kind of flowers are really, really common. You can see them in the ditch, in backyards, on sidewalks, and should be no trouble kind of getting reference for anything like that. Okay, I think this will do for the color on these guys right now. Want to dry that off. Now, as you're doing the painting, you start to think about things and areas that might need a little bit more contrast in them, like some darker darks behind the flowers. And just as I was looking this, I'm thinking, you know, the red, all well and good, but I think a nicer color for those flowers. It's as easier easier done with acrylics, but a nicer color for that flower would be a purple, like a mauve kind of a flowers. And if I wanted to change that, I'd want to have maybe a little bit of the, mix up the color and have some opaque white gouache. Or if I had my acrylics handy, I could use the acrylics to touch in there. I want to mix up a little bit of a purple here, just to see what it looks like. I'll use, depends what kind of color you use. I've got a nice rosy kind of a color here, rosy red, which works nicely for mixing a purple because it's nice and bright in the red area. In here, just mix up a little bit of purple. And then what would make that a nice rich purple would be the cobalt blue. It's different enough. There we go. So we'll get a nice purple. It's nice and rich. Two colors, a blue and a rosy red. And touch that with the, and that softens it, that gouache paint there. And just where those petals there where I'd indicated red, it becomes purple now, and I think that color goes nicer with the orange. It's a little trickier to do it with watercolor. Like I mentioned, to having the acrylics, you can change your mind at any stage along the painting and make those changes. With watercolor, you got to be a little more careful. And where it comes to fixing or changing an area, this is where it's handy to have some gouache paint, which is opaque. You add a little bit of that to the color that you're putting in, and it covers. Now we'll put a little bit more contrast in behind these flowers here. Come back to our background tones here. Fairly soft. Start to define some of the shapes of these flowers a little more. You don't want to get it too complex back there, not a lot of background texture. That would visually confuse things. A bit of darker tone behind the house here, punches that forward a little bit. Dabby little stuff, but when you give the contrast with it, that's what really helps to pop things for you. Don't be afraid of contrast. Just slowly moving around the area and adding that where you feel it needs to strengthen up a little bit. A little bit of contrast behind those purple flowers that we put in there. That's what's nice about this little brush. I can get into just a point. Tiny little areas, but makes a lot of difference. I'll let you know that I do have a lot of fun doing these, and I look forward to doing these videos these last few weeks here, coming down to the beach center there and working to record these videos for you. I'm having fun doing the process. It's not as much fun as working in person with everybody out in front of me here and asking questions and such, but that day will come, I'm sure. We'll get back. See how just the darkening of tones in the background is helping these flowers come forward. I'm pleased with the way that that's going. This is area coming back in here, working in the negative space of these flowers down here and the leaves. It's slow stuff, picky little work in there. But in the same way that it brought these flowers out, this kind of work and patience in between the leaves will really help to bring some focus to the foreground area. And then when your eye wanders a little bit deeper into the painting, then you see that it's a nice rural setting. Boy, that's a hard word to say. Think of the negative spaces, the blades of grass, if you keep them nice and crisp and clean, those bright greens will come forward. See how they're coming forward now? How are we doing for time on this? Does it matter?
No,
Can you keep rolling?
Whenever you want to finish, we can finish. We are right now. We're at We just hit 1 hour on recording.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It'll be sped up, especially because you.
Time flies when you're doing this. Boy, I just lose track of time. And I love that aspect of getting involved with a piece of painting, is that just time flies. I'm going to be starting another big painting at home. Got a water scene, like a wilderness scene, great big rocks, driftwood, big tall pines, sort of an evening setting. I'm looking forward to getting into it, but it's about 4 feet high.
A lot of detail, I guess, right? A lot of detail, I guess.
Right? It could, that potential, yes. If I want to take it that way, that far with that kind of detail. Now our center of interest is in these flowers here, right up in this area. So the more I can do to bring attention to these, and the attention being that it's going to be the contrast that does that for me. The contrast between the light greens and the darker shadows in between these blades of grass or stems here. Bring the contrast into this area. This will be something that inevitably I will spend some more time on this beyond the video, but this will give you a sense of what it's going to be, and I just feel that I like the thought process that I do while I'm doing this. I've said it slows down a little bit when I'm getting into details and the fine-tuning of it, and I just think I can do that better in my home studio when I've got time to think about it and then not get too tongue-tied here. I don't need to talk. I can concentrate on the thing and develop it to a stage where when you see it and it's finished and compare it to the last shot on the video, you'll notice a little bit of a change, but not a whole lot. It's just that in doing those little bits there, I find it a little better to do it in the privacy and quiet of the home studio. And my classes are pretty used to my doing that, but they've seen me every week, and I bring the finished one back the next week, and I send it out on videos, and I can do that too. Once I've done it, I will take a shot of it and send it out directly to people so that you can have a little bit of a heads up on what's coming down the pike in a week's time after the video is edited, and he does his magic. Diego does his magic on that. I don't want to get into too much detail in the background here. It's just tones. To fuss with detail and a lot of heavy tree shapes back in there, a lot of fine detail in that detracts from the center of attention that's meant to be up with the flowers here. But I think with what I've done so far, you can get the idea of the contrast here. And then these bright warm colors. The cool colors recede. I'm always saying this, the cool colors recede, warm colors come forward. I think I need to put a little bit more contrast up in here, cooler color perhaps up in there. Just with water, clean off the brush just with water. Soften those edges a little bit. There. That does what I feel it's supposed to do. Working in large areas where you got lots of room to maneuver, a big brush can do a lot of that for you. But to get into picky little areas, change down, size down a little bit. To get into some little areas, you just got a little bit more control over that. Poke a tiny little bit in a little bit of contrast into some areas, and it really helps to pop it. I'll probably do a little bit more of this increasing the contrasts like I've done here, a little bit more down in around these leaves and that. Again, not getting too much detail or anything because our focus wants to stay on that. We will sharpen up some of the edges on these stems perhaps. How am I going to do that? Let's see. Yeah, okay. So just thinking there, our light generally I feel is coming a little bit from this side. It's getting lighter, it's dawn. And so the underside of these flowers, soften that off with a little bit of water. Want this leaf to come in front of that stem. To clarify that, that's one area where I'm going to be increasing a little bit of contrast in that area. A little bit more intense greens. Some of these areas under here. So I think I'd like to maybe leave this now. It's been moving along quickly, and I don't want to really quickly bring it to an end. I want to think about it as I'm adjusting some of these tones and fine-tuning it. If you can work with this for now, and I will come back with the finished shot of it. We'll tag that onto the end of the video, and you can see from this stage to where it finishes up. Like I say, it won't be a whole huge departure, but I think I've got the essence of this image that I wanted to share with you, and that's where it came from. Just my pareidolia process that I use is a simple thing that I did a workshop with many years ago, and kind of discovered that I could find a lot of images in these abstract applications of paint on a big sheet. And this is just one little section of composition of paint blobs that suggested this scene for me. So I am pleased with the results of that for this morning's video, and we'll let that go, and look forward to seeing your efforts on this when you get to do this and come back on the Zoom conversation that we have in a couple of weeks' time with this, and we'll see where it goes from there. So in the meantime, stay healthy, stay happy, and keep painting.